There is a photograph that does not exist yet. It will be taken from inside a habitat module on the surface of Europa, looking out through a reinforced window at a sky that no human eye has ever seen in person. Jupiter will fill nearly half of that sky, not as a small bright dot the way we see planets from Earth, as a presence, a wall of swirling orange and white cloud, close enough to see structure in the storms, close enough that the person looking at it will feel, for the first time in the history of our species, genuinely small in a way that Earth's sky never made them feel. That photograph does not exist because nobody has taken it yet. But everything we have covered across this series, the physics, the engineering, the law, the politics, exists for the sole purpose of making that photograph possible. This is the last video in this series, and it is the only one that is not about problems to be solved. It is about the moment after they are solved. The first day. The first sunrise, if you can call it that. The first breath of recycled air in a place where the air was not supposed to exist. What does that day actually feel like? And what does it mean for everyone who is not there? Let's get into it. The first thing anyone on Europa will have to unlearn is how to read the sky. On Earth, the sky tells you the time. The sun rises, arcs overhead, sets. Day and night, 24 hours, the most fundamental rhythm of human experience, encoded into every culture, every religion, every biological process in the human body. Europa orbits Jupiter once every 3.5 days. From the surface, the sun, already small and faint at 5 times Earth's distance, moves across the sky on that 3.5-day cycle. But Jupiter does not move. Jupiter is so close and Europa's rotation is tidally locked that Jupiter sits in roughly the same position in the sky at all times, just as our moon always shows the same face to Earth. So a colonist standing on the Europa-facing hemisphere looks up and sees Jupiter. Always. It does not rise. It does not set. It is simply there, a permanent fixture, sometimes lit by sunlight, sometimes a dark mass blotting out a portion of the stars, but always present. Human circadian rhythms evolved over millions of years around a cycle that no longer applies. The habitat's internal lighting will be programmed to simulate a 24-hour cycle because removing that rhythm entirely causes severe physiological and psychological problems in every isolation study ever conducted. But it will be an artificial 24 hours maintained by computer, disconnected from anything happening outside the windows. The first generation of colonists will feel this disconnection acutely. Researchers studying Antarctic winter overcrews, people who spend months in continuous darkness or continuous daylight, describe a phenomenon called time blindness. Days blur together. The usual markers, sunrise, sunset, shifting light, disappear, and people lose their intuitive sense of how much time has passed. On Europa, that effect will be permanent, not a season, a way of life. And the second generation, the children born there, will not experience it as loss at all. They will grow up with an artificial day-night cycle as their only frame of reference, with Jupiter as a permanent fixture in their sky, the way the moon is a permanent fixture in ours, and with no felt sense that anything is missing. This is the first and gentlest version of the divergence we discussed in the very first video of this series. Not biological yet, not even psychological, for the second generation. Just a different relationship with the most basic unit of human experience, the day. The second thing every colonist has to unlearn is how their body works. Europa's surface gravity is approximately 13% of Earth's. A person who weighs 70 kilograms on Earth would weigh about 9 kilograms on Europa. Every motion, every reflex, every learned physical instinct built over a lifetime on Earth becomes wrong the moment you step onto the surface. We have some data on what low gravity does to the human body, but almost all of it comes from microgravity, the near-zero gravity environment of orbital spaceflight. Europa is not microgravity. It is low gravity. a meaningfully different environment that we have essentially no long-term data on, because no human has ever lived in a 13% gravity environment for an extended period. What we know from microgravity studies is concerning enough. Astronauts on long-duration ISS missions experience significant bone density loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular changes, and vision problems caused by fluid shifts in the body. These effects are partially mitigated by rigorous exercise regimens, but not eliminated. In 13% gravity, the body still experiences a gravitational load, just a much smaller one than Earth's. Whether that small load is sufficient to prevent the bone and muscle loss seen in microgravity is genuinely unknown. It is one of the open scientific questions that any realistic colonization timeline would need to answer through dedicated research, likely conducted on the Moon first, where gravity is roughly 17% before anyone seriously plans for Europa. For the first generation of colonists, this means a regimented life built around counteracting their environment. Daily exercise protocols, possibly mechanical resistance systems built into clothing or habitat design, constant monitoring of bone density and muscle mass. The body becomes something to be actively managed in a way that Earth never required. For children born and raised in 13% gravity, the question becomes different and stranger. If the human body adapts to lower gravity over a single generation or many, what does that adaptation look like? Bone density that stabilizes at a lower baseline because the load it needs to support is lower. Muscle structure that develops differently because the demands placed on it from birth are different. Nobody knows. We are talking about a controlled experiment in human physiology that has literally never been run, because the environment required to run it has never existed for a human being before. The first child born on Europa will be, among many other things, the first data point in an experiment about what the human body actually is, separated from the gravity that shaped every body before them. The third thing that changes is something most people never think about until they experience its absence: sound. On Earth, the world is full of ambient sound that we have stopped consciously noticing. Wind, birds, distant traffic, the rustle of trees. Even in a quiet room, there is air movement, the hum of electrical systems, sounds bleeding in from outside. Total silence, true total silence, is something most humans never experience and find deeply unsettling when they do. A habitat on Europa is a sealed environment. There is no wind because there is no atmosphere outside to create it. There is no ambient outdoor sound at all, because sound does not travel through vacuum. Everything a colonist hears for their entire life is generated either by the habitat's own systems or by other people. Life support systems produce constant low-level mechanical sound, the hum of air circulation, the cycling of equipment. Engineers who have studied long-duration habitat design know that this sound becomes part of the psychological environment in ways that are easy to underestimate. On the International Space Station, astronauts report that the constant mechanical hum becomes so familiar that silence, when systems briefly power down, is alarming rather than peaceful. The hum means the life support is working. Silence means something has stopped. For a Europa colonist, this relationship with mechanical sound is even more intense because there is no alternative, no open window, no outdoor space to step into for a change of acoustic environment. The hum of the habitat is the sound of being alive. It does not stop ever for as long as the colony exists. Psychologists who study isolated and confined environments, drawing on data from Antarctic stations, submarines, and space stations, consistently find that the acoustic environment of a habitat significantly affects mood, sleep quality, and long-term psychological well-being. Habitat designers for deep space missions are increasingly incorporating what is sometimes called acoustic comfort design, deliberately varying ambient sound, introducing recorded natural sounds, creating acoustic variety that the environment itself cannot provide. In other words, the first Europa colonists may live inside a habitat that plays recordings of wind and rain and birdsong, not for entertainment, but because the complete absence of those sounds that are woven into human neurology by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, is itself a health risk. The first generation will know these are recordings. The sound of Earth, piped into a sealed box on an alien moon, a deliberate reminder of where they came from. The second generation will have grown up with those recordings as simply the sound of home. Whether that distinction matters, whether a recorded bird song means something different to a child who has never heard a real one, is a question this series cannot answer. But it is the kind of question that defines what it means to be the first generation of something new. We opened this entire series with a scenario. A colonist on Europa watching a video of their daughter's birthday party on Earth, recording a response, and realizing that by the time it arrives, they are measurably younger than the moment requires them to be. We have spent 5 videos on the physics, the infrastructure, the law, the engineering, and the politics that surround that single moment. Now, in this final video, we can return to it with everything we have learned and understand it fully for the first time. The 43-minute delay is not just a technical inconvenience. It is the fundamental shape of every relationship a Europa colonist has with anyone on Earth. Conversation, in the sense that people on Earth understand it, real-time back and forth, immediate response, the small verbal cues that make communication feel alive, does not exist across that distance. Every exchange is a message and a wait. A thought, sent, and then 43 minutes of not knowing how it will be received, followed by 43 minutes for the response to return. A single exchange, the kind that takes 10 seconds in person, takes a minimum of an hour and a half. This is not unprecedented. Humans have lived with this kind of communication delay before, throughout most of history. Letters took weeks or months to cross oceans. People built entire relationships, entire lives, around correspondence that arrived in batches, was read and reread, and was responded to with careful thought because there was no possibility of a quick follow-up. What is unprecedented is doing this while simultaneously knowing, with mathematical precision, that the person you are writing to is aging at a measurably different rate than you are. The temporal grief we discussed earlier in this series is not abstract. It is the specific, daily experience of every message a colonist sends and receives. A small, persistent reminder that the connection, however real, however loving, exists across a gap that is not just distance. It is time itself, diverging, a little more every single day. The colonists who thrive, the psychologists studying this scenario suggest, will not be the ones who fight this reality or try to minimize it. They will be the ones who develop new relationship structures entirely. Correspondence as an art form again, the way it was for previous generations who lived with delay. A different rhythm of connection, slower, more deliberate, built around acceptance rather than denial of the gap. And for the children born on Europa who have never known anything else, the relationship with Earth-based family will simply be what it is. Grandparents who exist as recorded messages arriving in batches, responded to thoughtfully, loved deeply, but never experienced in real time. Not a loss, just a different shape of family than the one their parents grew up with. Every one of the people who steps onto Europa's surface for the first time will be carrying something that the second generation will not. A complete, lived memory of Earth. The first generation chose this. They applied, trained, prepared, and left, knowing exactly what they were leaving behind. They carry Earth with them in every sense, not just genetically, but experientially. The smell of rain, the sound of a crowd, the feeling of wind, the taste of food grown in soil under an open sky. These are not abstractions to the first generation. They are memories, vivid and complete, that will never be experienced again. This is, by every account from researchers who study long-duration isolation, the hardest part. Not the technical challenges, not the physical adaptation. The knowledge of what has been left behind, carried consciously for the rest of a life that will be lived somewhere else entirely. The second generation does not carry this. Europa is simply home. Earth is a place their parents talk about, a place in photographs and recordings, a place that exists the way distant ancestral homelands exist for immigrant families on Earth. Real, important, part of identity, but not lived experience. This is the moment, more than any technical milestone, where the divergence this series has been building toward actually happens. Not when the first habitat is built, not when the first child is born, but when the first generation that has never known Earth becomes the majority. When more people on Europa have only ever known Europa than have ever known anything else. That moment, by any realistic colonization timeline, is decades after the first landing. But it is coming, the same way every demographic transition in human history has come. Quietly, generation by generation, until one day the culture that exists is simply different, and nobody alive remembers it being otherwise. We are at the end of this series, and it is worth being honest about what we have actually been describing. Not a disaster, not a warning, something stranger and, in its way, more hopeful than either. Every population that has ever moved to a new environment, crossed an ocean, settled a new continent, adapted to a new climate, has changed in response to that environment. Sometimes the changes were physical over many generations. Always the changes were cultural, often within a single generation. The people who arrive are never quite the same as the people who stay, and the people born in the new place are different again from both. This has always been how humanity expands. It is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. What makes Europa different is not that this will happen. It is the scale of the differences involved. Not a new continent with a different climate, but a different gravity entirely. Not a new time zone, but a fundamentally different relationship with time itself, one that physics, not culture, imposes. Not a long voyage with eventual return, but a one-way journey into an environment so different that return, after enough generations, may not even be physically comfortable. The first day on Europa, when it happens, will be celebrated on Earth as a triumph. And it will be one. Everything covered in this series, the physics, the engineering, the law, the politics, all of it will have been solved, navigated, or accepted in order to make that day possible. But the first day on Europa will also be the first day of something else. The first day of a population that will slowly become something distinct. Not lesser, not greater, different. Shaped by a world unlike any human population has ever lived in before. We called this series the first permanent colony because that is the framing everyone uses. A colony implies a connection to a home, an extension of something that already exists. But colonies throughout human history eventually stop being colonies. They become home. And the people who live there stop being colonists from somewhere else and become simply people from where they are. That is what we are actually deciding when we decide to go to Jupiter's moons. Not whether to build an outpost, whether to plant the seed of something that, given enough time, the kind of time that does not feel like much to a species, but is everything to the individuals living through it, will become a second branch of humanity. Watching that happen, even from this distance, even just through 6 videos on a screen, is a strange privilege. We are not watching history happen. We are watching the conditions for history be assembled, piece by piece, fact by fact, years before the first ship leaves the ground. The photograph from inside that Europa habitat, looking out at Jupiter filling half the sky, does not exist yet. But everything in this series exists because one day it will. And whoever takes that photograph will not be looking at Jupiter the way we do now, as a distant curiosity in our night sky. They will be looking at it the way people look out a window at the world they live in, because by then, that is exactly what it will be. That is the end of this series. 6 videos. 1 question: what does it actually mean for humanity to leave Earth permanently? Thank you for watching all of it. If this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, subscribe so you catch whatever comes next. And thank you for being here for this one.